Module 42, we start to get into these behavioral therapy techniques. Okay, so how are we going to make this transition from previous therapies that were really focused on only treating insights and trying to address these insights to something where it's more behavioral based, where you're actually trying to change the overall outcome of that behavior, knowing that these insights may not produce the changes that we want. And so one of the ways that this happens is through conditioning techniques. And conditioning techniques are still about associative learning. It goes back towards that operant classical conditioning. What we see is that we can start to go through counter conditioning. So counter conditioning refers to linking new positive responses to previously aversive stimuli. So counter conditioning refers to linking new positive responses to stimuli that were previously ones that caused anxiety, caused stress, things that you were trying to avoid. Okay, so let me kind of give an example of this because I think it helps reinforce what this classical conditioning does for us. What this associative learning does for us. So let's say that you've been conditioned to fear stores because you've had a panic attack. What can happen is you can be led into a store and then helped with relaxation exercises. So we'll talk about this as exposure therapy. We'll talk about this next, in fact. And the goal is to associate stores with relaxation, a state that's incompatible with feeling fear. And so instead of having this relationship between a store and fear, based on the fact that you had a panic attack there, so you're afraid that panic attack might happen again, now you associate stores with instead being relaxed, which is the opposite of what you normally feel. So I actually had this happen with grocery stores. So in graduate school, I often went to grocery stores kind of late at night. It used to be kind of the last thing I do before I'd go to bed, call it a day. So I might go to the grocery store at 9:30 or 10, even sometimes as late as 10:30. And when you go to the grocery store that late, really there's no one around. And in fact, sometimes I'd go to check out from the grocery store and there wouldn't even be anyone there to help me check out. And so what I found is that it ended up kind of being a depressing experience. I didn't get to see anyone. The store was pretty empty. It was usually when I was pretty tired and worn out. So I started to associate kind of this worn out, tired feeling with the grocery store. And what I found is that even years later when I go to the grocery store, I'd still kind of feel kind of depressed, worn out, and bummed out, even though that might not be the case. That might not be the way that I was feeling at that moment. But suddenly just being back in that situation was enough to get me to cause that response again. And so I started to become aware of this, and I actually started working on my own counter conditioning. So for a while, what I do is if I had to go to the grocery store, I would put on my headphones and I'd listen to upbeat, positive music. And I'd kind of think about, the music, I'd focus on that, so that instead of feeling down when I'm at the grocery store, I feel the exact opposite. I also started bringing Evie with me to the grocery store. Okay, so taking Evie with me to the grocery store distracted me from how I was feeling, it gave me a chance to spend time with her. And she's fun and exciting to play around with and hang out with, so she was making me feel positive. So instead of feeling negative, I had this counter conditioning. And so in this case, it wasn't such a huge stressor I couldn't kind of make my own change. What we'll see is that with exposure therapy, a therapist will work with the client to help them become more relaxed as they go through this experience. Okay, so let's talk about this exposure therapy. So what we can see with exposure therapy is that conditioned fear becomes worsened when you avoid that feared situation. When you do that, it gets quickly reinforced by the reduction of anxiety. So the idea here is that if you're avoiding something that causes anxiety, that only reinforces that behavior. The reason why it reinforces that behavior is that if you avoid that source of anxiety, your anxiety level goes down quickly. But this starts to become problematic in the end, though, because there's certain things you can't avoid, or it's problematic to avoid that particular context or that particular experience, which means you start to develop it as being dysfunctional. If you think about individuals who are agoraphobic, running with our example here, if they're afraid to go outside, the more that they avoid going outside because it reduces their anxiety, the more it might reinforce that desire to stay inside, to not take on that challenge. What therapists will do is help that individual go through guided exposure. So guided exposure takes the client through a feared situation and reverses this reinforcement by waiting for the anxiety to subside during the exposure. So I'll read that for you again, we'll unpack this. Guided exposure involves a therapist exposing the client to a feared situation, and instead of letting that client become more anxious and and get out of the situation, they're going to keep going through that experience very slowly, waiting for that anxiety to resolve. And ultimately what we see here is that the person can start to habituate to that experience. So the anxiety itself, and then the feared situation. So if an individual is afraid to go outside, such as agoraphobics are, a therapist might work with that person through exposure therapy. They might think about going outside and go through that thought process and let that anxiety build up, but the therapist will help the client manage that anxiety. Therapist make sure the person doesn't become too anxious and shut down. Then maybe it's this idea of just putting your hand on the door handle to go outside, waiting for that wave of anxiety to kick in. Let that anxiety go past the person, let it kind of calm down before they keep taking steps. And what this basically does is it involves this idea of systematic desensitization. So the more you've been effective through these different steps, the less dramatic, the less aversive that experience. So Katie, my wife, was working with a client. She was anxious about speaking in front of others. And this was part of her job. She had to do this. And so what Katie did, she did this kind of guided, systematic exposure with her, where they started off first with just kind of thinking about talking in front of others, and then building that up a little. Then journaling a little about speaking with others. Never letting the client get to the point where the anxiety was kind of overriding things, but kind of working with things. And then she visualized giving a speech to others. And then she started kind of giving a speech to Katie. Again, letting those waves of anxiety come through and then calming down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys a video. This will be how we'll wrap things up today, in terms of talking about this exposure therapy. And what I want you guys to do is take notes in this exposure therapy, how the exposure therapy worked, what were the steps of the exposure therapy, and kind of anything that you notice as we kind of process this. So I can show you the video, but I want you guys to take those notes because this is where we're going to pick up when we're back together on Thursday. Okay, so give me just a moment to switch out to our video.
It's now time for Marvin's exposure, and I'm really worried about the next level for him.
So, as you can see, we are here in the beautiful Golden Gate Dog Park. You don't go to parks, do you? Why not?
No.
Why?
They're dog friendly.
Well, that sounds like a good thing.
To you, not to me.
Okay.
This exposure is going to bring up a lot of pain and memories from the past.
Oh, hell no.
Hey, hey, Marvin, stay with me.
This pit bull puppy comes on a corner. My heart, like, almost jumped out of my body.
Stay with me. Stay with me. You're okay. You're okay. Stay with me. Let's do this together. You're good. You're in control. If you're backing up, you're running from your fear. We'll let the dog get closer to you, but I don't want you to back up. This dog represents 40 years of being in pain. So can I let the dog come closer?
A little bit.
Okay. Okay, you tell her when to stop. I'm gonna let you tell her, okay? All right, good. You're good. Do not look away from the dog, okay? Go ahead and come a little bit closer. Good girl. All right. Okay, think of your family who is not gonna want you to suffer. I think you should pet the dog.
See, no, he's looking at me, no.
Marvin, come on, Marvin.
Ooh.
Think of your girls. Think of your girls. Think of your girls.
I'm not a coward.
You're not a coward. You are not a coward. You are a strong person. You're not a coward, Marvin.
I close my eyes and I go back in time, like where I was when I was 5 years old.
This is why you're confronting your fear, because you can't keep living like this. Okay? You can't keep living in sheer terror. Enough is enough.
Babies.
I know.
I love my babies
I know.
so much.
You cannot leave being afraid still.
I know you're going to be scared, but you have to touch the dog before you leave. I'm sorry. Walk up to the dog. Good see you shaking.
Oh my God.
Look at you.
Dogs know fear, they go after fear.
I know it was tough, but you're moving forward and you're regaining your life.
That dog can come inside here. No. Hey, he can't bring that dog inside here. Pit bull gotta go.
I can't get his car, Mom.
Take it somewhere else. I don't give a pit bulls and me don't get along. My name is Marvin Cruz. I'm 47 years of age. I'm terrified of pit bulls. My phobia started about maybe 5, 6 years old. My neighbor from like 2 doors down came over and we're playing in the yard, playing ball. This pit bull came in the backyard and was growling, going crazy. It attacked my neighbor, arms, legs, back, chest, I mean everywhere. He had over 1,000 stitches on his body. Ever since then, you know, if I see a pit bull, I'm ice cold, I'm frozen, I can't move. Babe, see anything out there? It's good?
Yeah, honey, it's clear.
You sure?
When we go for walks, we don't go far. We like stay around, and my dad, if he does walk with us, we'll use a 4-wheeler.
Come on, sweet pea.
She's sniffing. Just looking at him, he looks like he's not scared of anything. But when it comes to the pit bulls, he'll just freeze up like a little baby.
My kids, on their birthday, my wife took them to the park. I'm at home. I won't go to parks. Sad, you know. It's a shot that I should have been in. My kids' friends are always saying, "Where's your dad? Do you have a dad?" He's never here. And it hurts. It hurts a lot. Cheers. I need his treatment to get back to life again, to get back to reality.
All right, so we'll end class there. We'll pick up on Thursday talking about the video. We'll kind of break it down. Think about the exposure therapy. You can think about what causes an anxiety, kind of how they went through it, some of the cognitions that were addressing it. So maybe take a couple quick notes before kind of wrapping things up so that when we start things off on Thursday, we'll be able to kind of come back and process the video well. So let me pause real quick to see if there's any questions. All right. So I will see you guys on Thursday. I'll hang around a little bit in case you have any questions for me. Otherwise, keep in mind the timeline of all the things that are due. So before Thursday's class, you have the module outline, the quiz, and you need to have your music extra credit accepted by then if you're going to do that.